All right, thank you. All right, are we ready for your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Depp calls Debbie Lloyd
Okay.
by a videotape.
By deposition, okay.
So-
Okay.
California,
Yes,
and you do not live or work in Virginia, correct?
correct.
Have you at any time spoken with, can you please provide your full name?
Debra Lloyd.
And Ms. Lloyd, you live in California
Yes,
and you work in California,
yes,
and you do not live or work in Virginia, correct?
correct.
Have you at any time spoken with Mr. Depp or any of his counsel, either in preparation for this deposition or for any other matter after you no longer worked with Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Do you recall who you spoke to?
I believe her name was Camille.
And do you recall when you spoke to Camille approximately?
2 weeks ago.
And what did Camille and you discuss?
She had asked me if Johnny had ever thrown anything at me.
And what did you say?
No,
Was there any other, was that the total of your communications with Camille?
that was the only time that I remember speaking to her.
Did you speak about anything else other than whether, and when you say Johnny, I assume you mean Mr. Depp, correct?
Yes.
Did you have any other, did you discuss anything else other than whether Mr. Depp had thrown something at you?
They had asked if I would be willing to go to Virginia to the trial.
And are you willing to go to Virginia to be a trial witness?
No.
Did you, at any time, did you speak, and did you have any other, you recall anything else you and Camille spoke about?
Not in detail.
Do you know how long the conversation was, approximately?
Approximately 15 minutes.
Was it over the phone?
Yes.
Do you recall at any other time having any other communications with any other counsel for Mr. Depp?
No, there was somebody else on that call, I believe, from his side, but I don't know who it was.
Do you recall if it was a man or a woman?
A man.
Did you ever speak to Adam Waltman?
I know an Adam reached out to me a long time ago. I don't remember a last name.
You're a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner?
Yes.
Can you briefly explain what that is?
I'm a nurse practitioner that specializes in psychiatry.
And did you go to, where'd you go to school for that?
I got my master's from Maryville University.
Is that in California?
It's in Illinois.
And
No,
I
it's not.
understand.
It's in Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri. Sorry.
No problem. And I understand you're also a certified addiction nurse.
Yes.
And can you briefly explain what that is?
I had to get a certification in addiction nursing,
And what is addiction nursing?
and nursing that specializes in taking care of patients with chemical dependency issues.
And chemical dependency, that's drugs and alcohol.
Yes.
How long have you worked in those fields? Addiction nursing and mental health nursing.
Since 2004.
And would you agree that one of your specialties is concierge addiction services?
It was, yes.
What are concierge addiction services?
We would. A good question. I mainly deal with higher end clients and provide care, go to their home rather than have them come into facilities.
And would you at times provide 24/7 nursing care?
Yes,
And you'd also be a patient's travel companion for nursing care?
yes,
And you own your own company?
yes.
And what was the company's name?
Turning Point,
Okay. And do you still own Turning Point?
yes.
And what does Turning Point do?
Provides services. It's actually no longer, I still own it, but I don't work with it anymore. It provides services to either nursing or sober companion services to patients.
And when did you start Turning Point?
I don't recall the exact year.
Does anyone else own it?
No.
How many people work at Turning Point?
I'm the only employee.
And what do you have, contract nurses who work for you?
I did, yes.
And what does Turning Point do now, if anything?
Sits dormant.
Okay. And when did it start to sit dormant?
About 2 years ago.
Is there any particular reason why?
And that's when I became a nurse practitioner and changed my career path.
And where do you work now?
I work for Headlands Addiction Treatment Services,
And what do you do there?
nurse practitioner.
And what is there a difference between a nurse practitioner and a nurse?
Nurse practitioner, I can diagnose and prescribe medications underneath a doctor's supervision.
So when you were working at Turning Point, or when you were working at Turning Point, were you a nurse practitioner?
No,
What was your title then?
registered nurse.
And you performed work for Mr. Depp, correct?
Yes.
Was that with Turning Point?
Turning Point was contracted through Dr. Kipper.
Can you explain how that arose, how you began to work for Mr. Depp through Dr. Kipper?
And Dr. Kipper was his doctor and he needed nursing services, so Dr. Kipper reached out to me.
And it's Dr. David Kipper, correct?
Correct.
Had you worked with Dr. Kipper before working with Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Do you know when you started working for Mr. Depp, approximately?
Approximately, I think it was 2015 or 16.
Okay. And we can look at some documents and that may help. Do you know how many patients you would work with Dr. Kipper before working with Mr. Depp?
That would be a guesstimate.
Okay. Do you have any approximation?
20.
And when Dr. Kipper reached out to you about Mr. Depp, did he reach out to you by phone or by written communication?
By phone.
Do you recall what Dr. Kipper told you he was looking for in regards to Mr. Depp's care?
Detox.
And detox from what?
Originally, I don't think I knew any of the specifics.
What did you come to understand Mr. Depp was looking to detox from?
Opioids.
Any other medication or any other drugs that Mr. Depp was looking to detox from?
Not that I recall.
Do you know if Mr. Depp ever took cocaine?
You can answer if you know.
I never witnessed him use any cocaine.
So, did Dr. Kipper contract with your company for the care for Mr. Depp?
I don't recall the specifics of how we were brought on.
Well, okay. How were you paid?
Through Dr. Kipper.
Did you have to submit your time to Dr. Kipper?
Yes.
For Mr. Depp services? Did Mr. Depp ever pay you directly?
No.
Did you ever get any gifts from Mr. Depp?
Yes.
What gifts did you receive from Mr. Depp?
I remember getting a jewelry box and a, I forget what it's called, like a notepad, a fancy notepad, I guess.
It was, do you recall why Mr. Depp gave you the jewelry box? You can answer that.
I don't know why. I believed it was for a thank you.
Okay. And the same, you believed it was a thank you with the fancy notepad that you received?
It was at the same time.
Okay. Did you receive anything else ever from Mr. Depp?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Do you still do work for Dr. Kipper?
I have not recently.
Do you recall when you last worked with Dr. Kipper?
Not exactly.
Do you remember the year you stopped working with Dr. Kipper?
No.
Do you recall the last time you spoken to Dr. Kipper?
This week? Last week?
What did you talk to Dr. Kipper about this week?
He's my personal doctor.
Okay. So, did you speak to Dr. Kipper at all about this case?
No.
Have you ever spoken to Dr. Kipper about your deposition?
No.
Have you ever spoken to Dr. Kipper about his deposition?
Yes.
And you know who Erin Borum is, correct?
Yes.
And who is she?
She's a nurse that worked with us.
And Ms. Borum worked for Turning Point, is that right?
Yes.
And she, and did you hire Ms. Borum?
Yes.
Was Ms. Borum a salaried employee of Turning Point?
No.
So Ms. Borum was a contract employee for Turning Point, correct?
Correct.
So how, in kind of general sense, how did that work with Ms. Borum and Turning Point?
Objection, Dave.
If you needed her for a particular case, you'd hire her for that case?
Yes.
Okay. And you're saying your testimony is that you had hired Ms. Borum previously for other patients, is that right? Before Mr. Depp and Ms. Hurd?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall how Ms. Borum came to work for Mr. Depp and Ms. Hurd?
And do you recall how Ms. Borum came to work for Mr. Depp and Ms. Hurd?
Yes.
How did that happen? What happened?
I was taking care of Johnny and Amber. It was decided that Amber needed some support, so I brought her in for Amber.
So, were you Mr. Depp's primary nurse?
Yes.
And was Miss Borum Amber's primary nurse?
Yes.
And would you ever share responsibilities where Miss Borum would perform nursing care for Mr. Depp and you would perform nursing care for Amber?
I know Erin covered for me a few times. I do not believe I ever cared for Amber.
And you said that a decision was made that Amber needed nursing care?
Yes.
Who made that decision?
I don't recall.
Can we put up attachment 2 and we'll call this Lloyd Exhibit 1?
And stand by.
Thanks.
Exhibit 1.
Miss Lloyd, I'm showing you what's been marked as Lloyd Exhibit 1. You'll see it's many pages, and we're going to go through some of these during the day. But just looking at it, do you recognize what this is?
Yes.
And what is Lloyd Exhibit 1?
My nursing notes.
Okay. And so these are notes that you created?
Yes.
And these are notes you created for your care of Mr. Depp, is that right?
Correct.
And if at a break you want to go over to see the whole thing, I'm happy to let you do that, just to save time rather than having you read 123 pages. But did you create these notes in the ordinary course of business?
Can you clarify what that means?
You created these notes as part of your job of being a nurse, correct?
Yes.
Did Dr. Kipper ask you to keep these notes?
We just keep notes as nurses. I don't recall.
So this is your normal practice, keeping these notes. It's not particular to Mr. Depp, correct?
Correct.
Did you receive any training into how to keep these notes?
Nursing school.
Okay. And the notes are typed, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you bring a laptop with you when you were working with Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Well, let's just go to the first one. It says June 12th, 2014, 2300. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And 2300, that's military time, correct?
Yes.
So that's 11 p.m. at night?
Yes.
Okay. And it says RN and MD met with patient to discuss plan and medication regime. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. The RN is you, correct?
Correct.
And the MD is Dr. Kipper?
Correct.
And the patient is Mr. Depp, right?
Correct.
Okay. So where it says 6/12/14 at 2300, is that when you met with Mr. Depp, or is that when you wrote up the note?
That's when I wrote up the note.
Okay. So you may have met with Mr. Depp at some other time before this?
Sometime during that day.
Okay. So the time you have here is when you wrote the note?
Correct.
Okay. And would you typically type the notes as opposed to writing notes in handwriting and then typing notes?
Correct.
Okay. Did anyone review the notes?
You can answer if you know.
Notes were sent to Dr. Kipper.
How often would you send the notes to Dr. Kipper?
I don't recall.
And was there a system where he could see the notes, or did you email him, Dr. Kipper, the notes?
Email.
So, is it your understanding, based on these notes, that the first time you met Mr. Depp was on June 12th, 2014?
Yes.
And if we scroll down to the 6/13/14, this says you met with patient in his apartment, correct?
Correct.
So the next day you met with Mr. Depp in his apartment, is that right?
According to my notes, I don't recall.
Okay. And in the second line, you write, he stated that he initially started taking opiates after some dental work and became dependent on them. Is that something that Mr. Depp told you?
According to my notes.
Would there be a reason you would write that if Mr. Depp did not tell you that?
No.
Okay. And then you write, patient is fearful of coming off of opiates, but knows it's what he needs to do. So again, that's something, according to your notes, that Mr. Depp told you?
According to my notes, yes.
And then it says, patient also expressed some emotional trauma which causes him depression and anxiety. Again, according to your notes, that's what Mr. Depp told you?
According to my notes, yes.
Do you recall at all what the emotional trauma was that was causing Mr. Depp depression and anxiety?
I do not recall.
Okay. Let me ask this again. Do you recall what the plan was for Mr. Depp's detox as of the end of June 2014?
Plan in what regards?
Where was Mr. Depp's detox going to take place?
I don't remember when it was determined, but I remember that it was after filming. We would go to the island.
And that's the island that Mr. Depp owns?
Yes.
And you went to the island, correct?
Correct.
Who else was out on the island in this time when Mr. Depp was doing the detox?
You can answer if you know.
I know I was there. I cannot remember if Amber was there the entire time, and some of Johnny's staff, and Dr. Kipper came at some point.
How did you get to Mr. Depp's island?
Flew.
And then what, do you take a boat to his island?
Yes.
And if we go to, in the same document, Kipper 69, which I believe is page 17. There we go. You see where it says 8/8/14,
Yes.
and it says arrived on island today.
Yes.
Does that mean that you arrived on the island on August 8th, 2014?
According to my notes.
Okay. And on August 9th, 2014, it says patient expressed fears of never feeling normal without his drugs. You wrote that?
Yes.
Okay. And is that something that Mr. Depp told you?
According to my notes, yes.
And if we go 2 pages to Kipper 71. Oh, yeah, there we go. You see where it says at the top, MD's flight has been canceled.
Yes.
Arrangements are being made for him to arrive on the island 8/12/14.
Yes.
So according to your notes, Dr. Kipper, after the flight was canceled, was set to arrive on the island on August 12th, 2014.
According to my notes.
Ms. Lloyd, I'm showing you it's been marked as Exhibit 2, which is ALH 16110 through 113. Do you remember texting with Amber at all while you were on the island with Mr. Depp?
That is some of how we communicated, yes.
And does this refresh your recollection that Amber was, at least at some point, on the island with Mr. Depp during the detox?
Yes,
The gray part of the text is your text, correct?
yes,
And the blue is Amber?
yes,
And is in the gray part of the text where it shows a phone number there, is that your cell phone number?
yes.
Ms. Lloyd, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 3, text message chain between you and Amber Heard on August 16th, 2014. And again, in the gray box where it shows a phone number, that's your phone number, correct?
Correct.
And this, Ms. Lloyd, I'm showing you what's been marked as Lloyd Exhibit 4, text message chain between you and Amber on August 18th, 2014. You see that?
Yes,
Okay. Do you recall when on the island Amber would be telling you how Mr. Depp was doing?
according to these texts, that's what was happening, yes.
Do you recall how long you were on the island?
I do not.
Okay. In a day, do you recall how long you would see Mr. Depp?
It varied.
Would there be reasons why it varied as to how long you'd see Mr. Depp in a day?
I don't recall how it was determined.
How far away were you from where Mr. Depp was staying?
5 to 10 minutes.
By foot or by some other transportation?
By a John Deere tractor.
Okay. And what type of place were you staying in on the island?
It was a yurt.
Okay. And were you staying with anyone?
I was by myself some of the time, and then Dr. Kipper was also in the yurt for some of the time.
And did the yurt have separate rooms?
Yes.
And would you typically eat with Mr. Depp?
Varied.
And what was when you were on the island, what was your role in terms of Mr. Depp's detox?
Medication management.
And what do you mean by medication management?
To administer medications.
And was Dr. Kipper the person who was prescribing the medications?
Yes.
As part of the medication management, did Mr. Depp get a bag of meds? You can answer to the extent you know.
Did I give Mr. Depp a bag of medications?
Either you or Dr. Kipper?
Not that I recall.
Staying on this last page for a second of Lloyd 4, the picture of looks like a pillbox, right?
Correct.
Would you have provided either Mr. Depp or Ms. Heard Mr. Depp's medications in a box like this?
Yes.
Okay, well, why don't we actually just take a break for this moment? We've been about an hour. Take a, 5-minute break. Is there any reason to believe where you wrote RN received text from fiance that's not a text you received from Amber Heard?
No.
Lloyd Exhibit 5 is a chart of text messages we received in a production from Mr. Depp. It is Depp 7819. You see the second entry, entry 131.
Yes.
Okay. And where in the third row, there's your name, and above that name is a phone number. Is that your phone number?
Yes.
And you would sometimes text message with Mr. Depp too, correct?
Correct.
You see, it says in the body on that row 131, I will come by 80 within an hour to drop meds off just in case. How are you feeling? Your head back on straight. Do you see that?
I see that.
And this was a text you wrote to Mr. Depp?
According to this,
Do you recall, as of around August 26, 2014, what you meant by your head back on straight?
I don't recall.
And then Mr. Depp responded to you, you see in the next row. Pretty much, I don't have the ability to take anything more on my back right now. I'm fucking strong. If my arm is gangrenous, I would cut the fucker off. I'm threatened by the love I feel. I need to stop. Simple math. Do you recall receiving that text from Mr. Depp?
I don't recall. No, I don't recall receiving that.
Do you have any reason to believe you did not receive this text from Mr. Depp?
No.
If we go back to Exhibit 1, and if you can go to Kipper 101, and you see where it says 0125 under September 22nd, 2014?
Yes.
Okay. And you wrote, RN received text from patient stating that he'd been in an argument with fiance, and she, quote, had a nasty freak out, end quote, and he would like RN to come give him some, quote, some fucking knockout yum yum. RN instructed patient to take PRN Neurontin 300 milligrams, PRN, and Seroquel 50 milligrams, and that RN was on her way over. You wrote that?
Yes.
Do you recall anything about what the nasty freak out that Mr. Depp was referring to about Amber?
I do not recall.
And then you see the note for 3:30 for September 22nd, 2014?
Yes.
Okay. And again, that's 3:30 in the morning, right?
Correct.
And you wrote, upon arriving at the home, patient was sitting in kitchen with scraped and bloody knuckles on right hand. Patient stated he'd punched whiteboard in kitchen after fight. Patient stated he'd been texting his friend explaining why he didn't show up to play music, and fiance got upset that he was not giving her enough support, and the fight escalated from there. You wrote that note?
According to this, yes.
Do you recall going to Mr. Depp's home and seeing him with scraped and bloody knuckles on his right hand?
I do not recall.
Do you ever recall any incident where Mr. Depp had claimed he punched a whiteboard in the kitchen?
I do not.
Do you have any reason to believe where you wrote that you wrote, upon arriving at the home, patient was sitting in kitchen with scraped and bloody knuckles on right hand? Would you have written that based on your observation of Mr. Depp?
Yes.
On Kipper 111, there's a highlighted note at 1930 for October 14th. Do you see that?
Oh, wait, I'm a minute. Yes.
Okay. And you wrote, a patient finished filming and was extremely agitated leaving the set. Patient kicked in the door of his trailer and refused to speak to director. Patient was verbally aggressive to another person on the set. For no apparent reason. Per MD, patient is to take Xanax 2 milligrams to reduce his agitation at this time. You wrote that?
According to these notes, yes.
And were these notes based on your observation of Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
Did you ever attend filming where Mr. Depp was filming?
Yes.
Where you wrote patient kicked in the door of his trailer and refused to speak to director, that's based on your observation of Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
And where you wrote patient was verbally aggressive to another person on the set, so no apparent reason. Do you recall what that's based on?
I do not.
Would it have been based on anything other than your observation of Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
If you had been told that Mr. Depp was verbally aggressive, would you have written that in your note?
I don't recall.
And the note above it for 1630, you see that?
Yes.
All right. You wrote RN and MD arrived on set to assess patient. So that's you and Dr. Kipper, correct?
Correct.
And you wrote patient appeared agitated and was short towards RN. You wrote that?
According to this, yes.
And where you wrote patient appeared agitated and was short towards RN, meaning Mr. Depp was short towards you, correct?
I don't remember.
That's what the note means, right? Is there a
That's
reason?
what it says, yes.
Okay. And this note would have been based on your observation of Mr. Depp at the time, correct?
I don't remember.
And then you see under October 15th, there's another highlighted entry, correct?
Yeah.
And you wrote patient awake and states he slept from 2200 to 4:30. You see that?
Yes.
Patient continues to be agitated about work and is verbalizing having desire to escape with drugs. You wrote that?
It's in my notes.
And that would mean that you wrote that note, correct?
Correct.
And you would have written that note based off Mr. Depp telling you you had a desire to escape with drugs, correct? I'm sorry, did you answer it?
Yes, I said I don't remember.
And this is Exhibit 8. More text between you and Mr. Depp. Feel free to look through it.
Okay.
Mr. Depp wrote, I'm all right, confused as fuck. She said nothing of last night, and most certainly not one thing of the rap party's existence. All the proof that I predicted last night. How will I look at her when she gets back professing her undying love? All a fucking lie. I for sure, unfortunately, wouldn't mind some company, but I've inundated you with too much already. Love, love, me. That's a text you received from Mr. Depp.
I don't recall.
Exhibit 9.
And this is more text between you and Mr. Depp, and you can take a look through. On November 11th, 2014, Mr. Depp wrote, all good, haven't read her text yet. I'm feeling so fucked. Why was she at the goddamn rap party until 5 a.m.? Did Aaron say anything? The lies are so clear now. They're making me nuts, wondering what was so interesting to keep her there that goddamn long. Please ask Aaron. I must have truth. I need it. It's not the easiest thing to do at this point, though it's been a shitty and painful experience. I cannot help but hear her voice begging and crying. She wants to change and is going to change, etc. Help. I don't know what's real and what's paranoid jealousy. You received that text from Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
And you don't recall, did you recall ever Mr. Depp not feeling trust for Amber?
I don't recall.
While you were working with Mr. Depp, did he smoke marijuana?
I don't recall.
Do you recall if he took any, if not smoked marijuana, ingested marijuana in any sort of way?
I don't recall.
Exhibit 10.
Can you think of another instance where there was a patient, without giving me the patient's name or information, where they were allowed to continue to take marijuana while detoxing from other drugs?
I don't recall.
Exhibit 11 is Lloyd 2 through 5. Do you recall producing documents in this matter?
Yes.
Okay. And you produced text messages with Mr. Depp and with Ms. Heard?
Yes.
And this is a text message between you and Amber starting on December 26, 2014. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And you understand that you're in the text from you are the blue, correct?
Okay.
All right. You wrote, "Sorry to bother you. Is JD up? He has an important appointment at 2 p.m. and he isn't responding to me. Hope you guys had a beautiful Christmas." And Amber wrote, "Hey there. Yes, he is. He's opening presents with Lily Rose. What appointment is he being picked up?" Who's Lily Rose?
Johnny's daughter.
Did you ever see Mr. Depp super stoned when you were working with him?
I don't recall.
Does that mean that you never saw him stoned, or you just don't recall one way or the other?
I don't recall one way or another.
Do you know who the wit is?
Amber's sister.
Okay. Do you recall any time where Mr. Depp seemed confused about something that had occurred?
I don't.
Did you ever recall Mr. Depp wondering if he and Amber had a fight or if he was dreaming?
I don't recall.
Do you recall Mr. Depp ever not taking the medications he was prescribed?
Yes.
Did you recall Mr. Depp sometimes potentially doubling the medications that he was prescribed?
I recall thinking that at times.
Did you believe that Mr. Depp wanted to detox off of drugs? What was your answer?
Yes.
And how did Mr. Depp show you that?
It was on his own free will that he hired us to be with him.
And then did Mr. Depp have any relapses with drugs when you were working with him?
I don't recall.
Do you recall Mr. Depp and working with him ever take cocaine? Not that you necessarily saw him, but that you understood that he took cocaine.
I never saw Mr. Depp use cocaine.
Did you have any understanding that Mr. Depp took cocaine, whether you saw it or not?
I don't recall.
Did you administer drug tests to Mr. Depp?
In the beginning.
Did you see the results of the drug tests?
Yes.
Did you see Mr. Depp being positive for taking cocaine?
I don't recall.
Do you recall accompanying Mr. Depp to Australia?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall accompanying Mr. Depp to Australia in around March of 2015?
I don't remember dates.
Do you recall accompanying Mr. Depp to Australia when he was filming Pirates of the Caribbean 5?
I do.
Where were you staying in Australia in relation to Mr. Depp?
Distance-wise,
Yeah, how far away were you from him?
about 30 minutes
Okay. Where was Mr. Depp staying?
in a rental house,
And where were you staying?
in an apartment.
And what city were you in?
I don't recall the name.
Okay. And was Dr. Kipper there with you?
He came and went.
Did you fly to Australia with Mr. Depp?
Sometimes I did, and other times I flew on a commercial.
Do you recall talking to Dr. Blaustein about Mr. Depp in Australia?
I do not.
Do you recall Mr. Depp not doing very well while he was in Australia? As of March 1st, 2015.
I don't recall anything around that time.
Do you have an understanding as to what Mr. Depp was doing with Marilyn Manson?
I do not.
Did you ever tell Dr. Kipper that Mr. Depp was doing what he wants with Marilyn Manson?
I don't recall.
Do you recall Marilyn Manson being in Australia with Mr. Depp?
I do not.
It says Debbie is worried and somewhat exhausted. Do you recall being exhausted while in Australia and working with Mr. Depp?
I do not.
Do you have any reason to believe that what Dr. Kipper wrote is not true?
I do not.
We could take this down. And go back to Exhibit 1. And if we could go to Kipper 157. You see 3715?
I do.
Okay. Before I ask, do you recall how long you were in Australia with Mr. Depp?
No, however long the filming of Pirates was.
Okay. And at 3715 at 11:30, you wrote, MD received a text message from client that he'd been arguing with wife and that he had cut his finger. According to patient, his assistant and security were on their way to pick him up. You wrote that?
According to my notes, yes.
Is there any reason to believe you didn't write that note?
No.
Do you recall Dr. Kipper receiving a text message from Mr. Depp about Mr. Depp cutting his finger?
I don't. I'm just what this note says.
Okay. Do you recall going to Mr. Depp's house after learning that he had cut his finger?
Yes.
What do you recall about that?
That we went to the house and I don't even think I went in at first. Dr. Kipper went in and he had cut his finger and we took him to the emergency room where his finger had been cut.
You recall what the house looked like when you went in?
Yes.
What did the house look like?
It was a mess.
Hey, can you describe how it was a mess?
I don't remember details, but I remember there was some writing on the wall and I remember a smashed TV.
Do you remember what any of the writing said on the wall?
I do not.
Did you, and you said you recalled the smashed TV?
Yes.
Do you recall, was Amber in the house?
I don't recall.
Do you recall seeing Amber that day?
No, I don't recall.
Do you recall what rooms you went through of the house, Mr. Depp's house?
I remember looking for his finger in the downstairs area.
And what was in the downstairs area? Or what rooms were in the downstairs area?
It was like a pool table entertainment room.
Did you look anywhere else around the house?
I don't recall.
What was the pool table entertainment room? Was that a mess?
I don't recall.
Do you recall going into the kitchen of the house?
I don't recall.
Do you recall finding Mr. Depp's finger?
I did not.
Do you know who found Mr. Depp's finger?
Yes.
Who?
Ben.
Ben who?
I don't remember his last name.
And who was Ben in relation to Mr. Depp?
He was like our house manager.
Do you recall where the finger was found?
I do not.
Do you recall if Mr. Depp appeared to have dirt, grime, and paint on his hands?
Yes, he did.
Do you recall seeing any glass anywhere?
I do not.
Do you recall smelling any alcohol?
I do not.
And who else was with you when you went to the hospital?
Malcolm and Stephen.
And who were Malcolm and Stephen?
Stephen was his assistant, and Malcolm was one of his security guards.
Do you recall who was holding the piece of finger that had been cut?
Ben brought it to the ER.
What did Ben bring the finger in?
I don't recall.
Was it on ice, the finger?
I don't recall.
Did you ask Mr. Depp how he cut his finger?
I don't recall if I asked him.
Did you ask anyone how Mr. Depp had cut his finger?
I don't recall.
Do you have any understanding as to how Mr. Depp cut his finger?
I heard different stories from people.
What were the different stories you heard?
I had heard that Amber threw a bottle of vodka at him. I had heard that he slammed it with a phone.
Do you recall who you heard that Amber had thrown a bottle at him?
I do not.
Do you recall who you heard that he slammed it on the phone?
I do not.
The stories that you had heard, did you hear it on that day of March 7th or March 8th, 2015, or later?
I don't remember.
Okay. Did you ever talk with Mr. Depp about how he cut his finger?
I don't recall conversations.
Did you ever talk with Dr. Kipper about how Mr. Depp cut his finger?
I don't recall specific conversations.
Did Mr. Depp, how long was Mr. Depp in the hospital for?
I don't remember.
Did you have any concerns about the nurse supervision of Mr. Depp?
I know at times we would go days without me seeing him, but I don't know specifically what this is regarding.
Were there issues with the nurse supervision while in Australia?
I don't recall specifics.
You have no recollection of Dr. Kipper withdrawing his care of Mr. Depp for any period of time?
No. I know at times it was discussed when he would miss appointments, but I don't recall him ever actually going through with withdrawing his care.
Do you recall there being concerns about Mr. Depp taking substances that he shouldn't have been taking?
I don't recall what that was regarding.
Do you recall having major concerns about leaving for Australia with Mr. Depp?
I do not.
While that's going up, Ms. Lloyd, the day that Mr. Depp cut his finger, you don't recall seeing Amber one way or the other, is that right?
I do not.
Exhibit 16 is Lloyd 140 through 145. And Mr. Depp responded, "It's sad. I love you so much, little Debbie." And of course, Kipper too. He was right, though I did feel a bit of a sting when his letter, paper trail, arrived on the off chance that I croak, which I also understand. Just never heard of anyone being fired by their physician before. So I'm kind of proud of that little fact too. I love you, kid. Even attempting saying thank you to you would be like a monkey trying to fuck a football. It's just simply impossible. I wish things could have ended on a better note. All my love, Nurse Shark, JD. Do you recall receiving this text from Mr. Depp?
I don't.
This text was on your phone, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Would Mr. Depp call you Nurse Shark?
Yes.
Would Mr. Depp call you Little Debbie?
Yes.
And okay. And you don't recall Mr. Depp saying never heard of anyone being fired by their physician before.
I do not.
And then you respond on the next page. I love you too and hope this is not the end. Be safe and be smart, my son. You sent that text to Mr. Depp.
According to this, yes.
Okay. And do you know what you meant by be safe and be smart?
I don't know.
And then Mr. Depp wrote, I've been off of for 3 days. The doc jumped the gun. Also, please thank him for the Motrin and the black baclofen. They work a treat for amputated fingers. Goddamn, I love that weird fucker no matter what. You received that text from Mr. Depp.
According to this,
Do you understand what is meant by I've been off of for 3 days?
I do have no idea.
Okay. You respond, so glad to hear you have been off. No matter what, I just want you to feel better.
Yeah, I don't know what we were referring to.
And we go down to the next page. You write, I'd be more than happy to come back and help you with pain management and Taradol injections. I know Kipper loves you and would always want to continue your care if you're no longer using. You wrote that to Mr. Depp,
According to this,
and this text was on your phone, correct?
correct.
And what did you mean by Kipper loves you and would always want to continue your care if you're no longer using?
I don't know just what it says.
No
I
longer
don't,
using?
I don't know what that was regarding.
You don't know what no longer using is referring to?
I do not.
And then Mr. Depp wrote, I don't know, I'm going to stop it all except whatever I was on before and just deal with it. You received that text from Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Do you know what he was referring to where he said, I'm going to stop it all except whatever I was on before and just deal with it?
I do not know what that's regarding.
And then you wrote, I respect whatever decisions you'll make. I'll be sad to leave the crew as I love you all. I hope to always be in touch, even if you choose not to continue a working relationship. Miss you already. I will get in touch with Kevin and get my stuff out. Or 72 soon. Hugs. You wrote that message to Mr. Depp.
According to this,
Okay. And then Mr. Depp wrote, take care, darling. I cannot ever thank you enough all you've done for me. On the junkie side and the broken heart side, you've been a lifesaver. Literally. We'll be seeing each other again, sweetheart. Love you so much, little Debbie, and so does my entire crew. X. You received that text message from Mr. Depp?
according to this, yes. I'm gonna cry. This is-
Miss Lloyd, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit Lloyd 17, which is Lloyd 158 through 160, which is a text message between you and Johnny Depp from your phone. You see that?
yes.
Okay. And on March 27th, 2015, you wrote, good morning, sleepyhead. Aaron came by to give you a shot. You were still sleeping. Take the pill form of Tadarol to hold you over, and I will check in with you when I'm done my appointment in Beverly Hills. And then you wrote, have you taken pill? If not, hold off, and Erin is on her way to give you injection. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And you wrote that text message, correct? Or those messages?
Yes.
Okay. And then on the next page, Mr. Depp wrote, the fucking pain is as bad as when it was cut off. Horrific. You received that message from Mr. Depp?
Yes.
And he's talking about his finger there, correct?
Yes.
And you received that text message from Amber, correct?
Correct.
Right. And then you wrote, he's at the studio with Marcus and is supposed to call me when he gets back to the lofts. I will drive up there if you want me to. Always feel weird showing up unexpected. Do you want me to go? You wrote that text message to Amber?
I don't recall, but according to this, yes.
Do you know who Marcus is?
Yes,
Who was Marcus?
Marcus Mumford,
And what was his relationship to Mr. Depp?
friend.
Okay. And then you wrote, I know Stephen is there. Let me just check in and see what I can find out. I'll get right back to you. Who is Stephen?
His assistant.
All right. Do you ever remember checking if Mr. Depp had been taking cocaine?
I don't remember specifically asking any questions related to that.
Is there any reason to believe that you didn't do what you said in your text message?
No,
Do you recall what you were giving Mr. Depp Valium for?
I do not.
Ms. Lloyd, showing you again what's been marked as Exhibit 1, and I'm going to point you to Kipper 167, which is from April 13th, 2015.
Okay.
Okay, do you see it? You see the entry for 1500?
Yes.
All right. You wrote bandage changed and hand exercises done at appointment with surgeon's office. Per RN at surgeon's office and occupational therapist, hand is healing well and finger has good range of motion. Exercises to be done 3 to 5 times per day. Patient is in good spirits and said he's not smoked marijuana in 3 days. States he feels majority of his issues with his wife have been from him using drugs and alcohol. Patient states he will no longer sneak, use, and wants to enjoy clarity. You wrote that?
Yes.
And these are part of your nurse's notes?
Yes.
And Mr. Depp told you that he felt the majority of his issues with his wife had been from him using drugs and alcohol.
According to the note, yes.
And Mr. Depp wrote he will no longer sneak, use, and wants to enjoy clarity.
According to the document, yes.
What is being referred to as no longer sneak, use?
I only know what's stated in my notes.
Okay. Would it be anything other than drugs or alcohol?
I don't recall.
Was there anything that Mr. Depp was sneaking other than drugs and alcohol that you were concerned about?
I don't recall.
If we go to 175, Kipper 175 on this page, on this document, it's notes for June 28th, 2015.
June.
It says at 1700, RN received initial results from brain MRI. No obvious abnormalities noted. Final report will be done tomorrow. Patient informed of results. Do you recall why Mr. Depp received the brain MRI?
He was having chronic headaches.
And then you see at 6:30 at 1300.
Yes.
Okay. And that's highlighted.
Yeah.
Okay. You wrote RN arrived on set to visit patient. He was upset due to having an argument with his wife. Patient stated he had taken about 4 Xanax, 1 milligram over the past 24 hours to deal with the stress he was feeling. Patient was able to express his emotions appropriately. Patient stated that he had not slept the night before due to argument with his wife. That's a note you wrote?
Correct.
Okay. And that's based off of information provided to you by Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
Well, we're
According to my note, yes.
So Mr. Depp told you he'd taken about 4 Xanax, 1 milligram over the past 24 hours, correct?
According to my notes, yes.
Okay, and then at 1920 on June 30th, it said patient had another argument with his wife. patient was anxious and was asking for medication to help calm him down. Seroqual 50 milligrams administered. You see that? And that's a note you wrote?
Yes.
Do you know why your nursing notes ended on July 1st, 2015?
I do not.
How did you continue to care for Mr. Depp as his nurse after July 1st, 2015?
I do not recall my last date.
Did you prepare nursing notes through the time that you were Mr. Depp's nurse?
I did.
Okay. And did you provide those notes to Dr. Kipper?
I did.
Ms. Lloyd, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit Lloyd 19. This is an email from Dr. David Culber on June 27th, 2015 that you were copied on. Do you see that?
Yes.
And do you know who Dr. Culber is?
I don't recall exactly who he was.
Did you understand that Mr. Depp went to a specialist for his finger?
Yes.
Okay. You're copied on this email?
I see my name copied on the email. Yes.
Okay. And you recall that Mr. Depp was treated for a bad crush injury for his finger?
I recall him being treated for a finger injury. I didn't realize, this is the first I remember hearing it was a crush injury.
And that's the email you received from Dr. Culber, correct?
I'm seeing this today. I don't recall receiving this email.
Okay. Is there any reason you believe you didn't receive this email?
No,
Okay.
I just don't recall.
Ms. Lloyd, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 20, which is a text message chain between you and Mr. Depp from your phone. You see that?
I see that.
On July 5th, 2015, Mr. Depp wrote to you, canceling the squeezing and needles tonight. Need to get the recluse out of his cage and his brain. You received that text message from Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Okay. And then you said, how come you're canceling? You okay? Not sure what you mean by the rest of your text. Please let me know if you need anything. I'm here if you want to chat or want me to go hang at the house with you. You wrote that text to Mr. Depp.
Yes.
And then Mr. Depp wrote to you, I'm in a very anxious and painfully confused state. Rather not get into details, but in a nutshell, problems with family, my company, the ex, business manager, and my fucking jumbled brain will need refills of meds tomorrow. Thanks, honey, X. You received that text from Mr. Depp?
According to this, yes.
Okay. And Mr. Depp talked about how he was having problems with his family,
That's what this states.
and Mr. Depp was having problems with his company,
That's what this states.
and Mr. Depp was having problems with the ex,
That's what this states.
and Mr. Depp was having problems with his business manager.
According to this text.
And Mr. Depp was having trouble with his fucking jumbled brain, correct?
According to this text.
I'm just going back to Exhibit 1 for a moment. If we can go back to Kipper 167. And Ms. Lloyd, I'd ask you to look at the entries for April 14th. It's at the bottom.
Okay.
You wrote at 1400, RN and MD arrived at patient's home to have meeting to set treatment plan and boundaries while traveling in Australia. You wrote that?
Correct.
And the RN is you, correct?
Yes.
And the MD is Dr. Kipper, correct?
Correct.
And do you recall what the treatment plans and boundaries were while traveling in Australia as of April 2015?
I do not recall.
And then if we go to the next page, you see the April 15th entries?
Yes.
Okay. And at 12:15, you write, arrived at patient's home, assistant was in hallway and informed RN that patient was in a bad mood and told assistant he did not need anything from him today. RN was led in home by security and knocked on patient's door to let him know she was there. Patient screamed, "What?" RN informed patient she was letting him know she was there and would be downstairs. About 5 minutes later, security came into house and informed RN that patient has told security to get everyone out of his home and he did not want any more unexpected guests. RN left property and informed MD of the events. Per MD, drop tomorrow's meds off with security and do not reach out to patient again. Wait for patient to reach out to medical team. You wrote that note?
Correct.
And this document also, this note also talks about you informing Dr. Kipper about what happened in this note, correct?
Yes.
This Lloyd I'm showing what's been marked as Lloyd 21. You see at April 15th at the bottom, there's a text from Mr. Depp,
Yes.
and he wrote, "Hey, sweetheart, I'm so sorry about today. I thought you were Steven, whom I'm not. Particularly enthused about for his loss of loyalty and his loss of memory. He has tried everything to fuck me over as far as traveling with my wife. He also bursts into my fucking house like it's goddamn Grand Central Station. I'm truly sorry if I upset you. If you like, you can give me some morphine to see if my tongue and penis touch. All my love, Jay." Did you receive this text from Mr. Depp?
It appears so. I don't. Yes.
Okay. Do you have any understanding as to what Mr. Depp was referring to where he says, Steven tried everything to fuck me over as far as traveling with my wife?
I do.
First of all, going back to your work for Dr. Kipper, you said, I think you testified earlier, you cared for multiple patients that were of Dr. Kipper's, correct?
Correct.
And when you would care for Dr. Kipper's patients, how would you report their status to Dr. Kipper?
Objection vague.
Multiple different resources: phone, text, verbal, verbal and written.
And how often would you report to Dr. Kipper about his patients?
It responded. I mean, it depended on different patients, varied.
And I believe you testified earlier that you maintain nursing notes for those patients, correct?
Correct.
What type of information did you maintain in these notes?
And mainly we provide care given and patients' responses to care given or any external factors that could affect the patient.
Is there any information that you would not include in your notes?
Not
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your answer.
not specifically.
Other than Dr. Kipper, does anyone else review your notes?
If another nurse was to work on the case, they could have access to the notes.
And does Dr. Kipper advise you on any information that should be maintained in your notes?
Not directly.
Has he ever told you that certain information should not be included in your notes?
No.
When did you become a registered nurse?
2004.
And have you been employed as a registered nurse from that time up until you became a nurse practitioner?
Yes.
In your time as a registered nurse, have you ever had a patient that you suspected was the victim of domestic abuse?
No.
Do you have any professional responsibility to report domestic abuse?
Yes.
And what is that responsibility?
I'm a mandated reporter for child elder abuse and any suspected injuries.
How would you define suspected injuries?
If I was to work in a facility and somebody came in and reported, or I felt that it was a result from an injury caused by somebody else.
Who do you report the abuse to in that instance?
I've never had to report abuse.
Okay. Given your professional responsibility, do you know who you would report that to in that event?
I do not.
In your time as a registered nurse, have you ever witnessed physical violence by one of your patients?
I do not recall ever witnessing any violence.
And when you say any violence, does that mean perpetrated by your patient or against your patient, or just?
Just in general violence.
So you met Mr. Depp either on June 11th or June 12th of 2014?
According to my notes, yes.
Okay. And had you ever spoken with him before that date?
No.
When did you first meet Ms. Heard?
I don't recall.
Do you recall when you first met her? Not specifically when, but do you recall the instance when you first met her?
I do not.
When you first met Ms. Heard, did you have an understanding as to what her relationship to Mr. Depp was at that time?
Yes.
And what was that understanding?
That they were in a relationship.
Were they engaged when you first met them?
I don't recall the dates they got engaged.
Were they married when you first met them?
No.
Did you attend their wedding?
Yes.
And where was that?
On the island in the Bahamas.
Can we take this down and please pull up what I've marked as document B?
But 23.
Now, just for the record, I believe these are the nursing notes you were looking at earlier. This just has a different production number, and I just thought it might go more smoothly if I am calling out the correct page number. So just to establish this, do you recognize this document here?
Yes.
And these are your nursing notes that I believe you looked at with Mr. Nadelhaft earlier, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'd like to direct your attention to the entry for June 17th of 2014, which is on page with, perfect, there it is. This is a note you prepared, correct?
Correct.
And at the time that you prepared this note, were you in Boston with Mr. Depp?
According to the note, yes.
Now, in the subsection that says to 2330, do you see where it says accompanied patient, fiance, assistance, and security to concert?
Yes.
Okay. And in this note, patient refers to Mr. Depp. Is that right?
Yes.
And fiance is Ms. Heard?
Yes.
Just refresh your recollection that Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard were engaged in June of 2014.
According to this, yes.
Is this the first time you met Ms. Heard?
I don't recall when I met her.
Further down in the note, do you see where it says assistant was also asked to pass on RN and MD's numbers to fiance, as we would both like to speak with her and to obtain her input towards patient treatment. You see where I'm referring to?
Yep.
Okay. RN is referring to you in this instance,
Correct.
and MD refers to Dr. Kipper.
Correct.
Do you recall why you wanted to speak with Ms. Hurd at this time?
I do not.
Do you recall Ms. Hurd expressing interest in participating in Mr. Depp's treatment?
I don't remember the events other than what's stated in my notes.
Your phone number was given to Ms. Hurd, though, correct?
Correct.
724.
Ms. Lloyd, do you recognize this document?
No.
So I take it you did not prepare this document, is that correct?
Correct.
Directing your attention to the bottom of the page.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that's probably a good break to go ahead and have our lunch break. So we'll go ahead and break until 2 o'clock. Do not discuss the case with anybody. Don't do any outside research, okay? We'll come back and continue this deposition. All right, we can continue with Ms. Lloyd's testimony.
You see where it says this protracted therapy will include 12-step private counseling and personal psychotherapy and couples therapy with his fiance Amber. Both are in agreement to this plan. Do you see where I'm referring?
Yes.
Do you recall that couples therapy was a component of Mr. Depp's treatment?
I don't recall what was set between him and the doctor.
Do you recall Mr. Depp and Ms. Hurd attending couples therapy together?
Yes.
If we could turn to the next page here. And then at the top, it says, I met with Amber for 90 minutes and discussed the above and her concerns that he be strictly monitored and supervised. Do you recall Dr. Kipper meeting with Amber early on in Mr. Depp's treatment?
I do not.
If we could bring back up document B, which is now marked as Exhibit 22, is that correct?
23.
23? Okay. Can we please go to the entry for June 24th, 2014, which is on Dep 1661.
Okay.
Okay. Now, with respect to the entry for June 24th, 2014, this is an entry you prepared, correct?
Correct.
And the first line says, RN and MD met with patient's fiance to inform her of treatment plan for patient. Do you see that?
I do.
Does this refresh your recollection that you attended a meeting with Dr. Kipper and Ms. Hurd concerning Mr. Depp's treatment?
I don't recall the meeting.
Do you have any reason to doubt that this meeting occurred?
No.
Do you have any, other than what's reflected in this note, do you have any other independent recollection of any such meeting with Dr. Kipper and Ms. Hurd?
I do not.
If I could direct your attention just to the last line of the note, it says here, she was encouraged to call RN or MD with any questions or concerns that might arise. Do you see that?
I do.
throughout your treatment of Mr. Depp, did Ms. Heard reach out to you with questions and concerns?
Yes.
She had your phone number, correct?
Yes.
And I think we saw some text messages that Mr. Nadelhaft was asking you questions where Ms. Heard was reaching out to you, correct?
Correct.
When Mr. Depp became your patient, did Ms. Heard ever show you any pictures of Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
Do you recall Ms. Heard showing you any pictures of cocaine?
I don't recall.
Do you recall Ms. Heard ever showing you any audio recordings of Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
Okay, I'd like to move on to the Mr. Depp's detox, and that was on his private island, correct?
Correct.
And you traveled down to the island with Mr. Depp, is that right?
I don't recall. I'd have to, if it should be in my notes.
We can look at those in a moment. But you were on the island with Mr. Depp for the majority of his detox, correct?
Yes.
And when you were on the island, did you see where Mr. Depp was staying?
Yes.
And was Ms. Heard staying with him in that location as well?
Yes.
And what did their accommodations look like?
Can you be more specific?
What type of structure were they staying in?
It was a house.
Could we pull up document E, which is a short video?
Please stand by.
And for the record, this was produced as Depp 9811.
During Exhibit 25. Let me know whenever you need me to play, Counsel.
Please play, thank you. Ms. Lloyd, do you recognize the location reflected in that video?
Yes.
And what is it?
It's the Johnny's home on his island.
And is that where he was staying during the detox process?
Yes.
Is that video consistent with how the house looked in August of 2014?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any part of the house that's not reflected in that video?
The bathroom wasn't in the video.
When you were on the island, you were personally overseeing Mr. Depp's detox process, correct?
Correct.
And how often would you see him in person during that time?
That's an answer.
It varied.
Did you see him in person at least once a day?
I cannot recall.
When Dr. Kipper arrived, do you recall how often he would see Mr. Depp?
I do not.
What substances was Mr. Depp detoxing from?
Opiates.
Was he detoxing from any other substances?
Not on the, no, I don't recall.
have you overseen other patients detoxing from opiates before you were caring for Mr. Depp?
Yes.
How many would you estimate?
Hundreds.
What is that process? And what does that process do to the person physically?
They go through withdrawal symptoms and we medicate them.
And what type of withdrawal symptoms have you observed?
Nausea, vomiting, body aches, hypoerection, rhinorrhea, restlessness, anxiety.
Is there a time during the detox process when those symptoms are particularly the most acute?
Yeah.
What stage in the process is that?
Typically day 3 through 5 or 6.
How would you describe Mr. Depp's physical state throughout the detox process?
I don't recall specifics. I'd have to refer to my notes.
How would you describe Mr. Depp's psychological state throughout the detox process?
I don't recall. I'd have to review my notes.
All right, let's go back to your notes then, which I believe is Exhibit 23. Okay, great. Could we first go to the entry dated August 8th, 2014? Okay. Ms. Lloyd, does this refresh your recollection as to when you arrived on the island to assist Mr. Depp in his detox process?
According to my notes, it was August 8th.
Okay, and so as I think we established earlier, you met Mr. Depp in June. Fair to say that you had known him for about 2 months at this time?
Correct.
Okay. Can we please go to the entry for August 11th, 2014? Okay. And this is a note you prepared?
Yes.
Okay. If you need to take a minute and read it over, just let me know when you're done, or I can go right into it.
Okay.
Fair to say that this note reflects that Mr. Depp was experiencing discomfort on this date?
According to my notes, yes.
It says he was experiencing muscle spasms, chills, and pains, right?
Correct.
Did you personally observe Mr. Depp in this state?
According to this note, it does not appear I did.
Okay. Are these symptoms typical during a detox process?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Can we please go to the entry for August 12th, 2014? Okay. And I believe you looked at this earlier, but I'd just like to direct your attention to the last line in this first paragraph. MD arriving this morning and will assess patient. Do you see that?
Where are we on? What?
So directing your attention to the August 12th, 2014 entry.
Yes, I see it. Sorry.
Oh, great. And so based on your note, it appears that Dr. Kipper arrived on the island on August 12th. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Was the plan always for Dr. Kipper to come down to the island to attend to Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
Do you recall any issues in your caring for Mr. Depp prior to Dr. Kipper's arrival?
I don't.
Do you recall any medical issues arising with Mr. Depp before Dr. Kipper arrived that caused you concern?
I don't recall.
If there had been a serious medical issue with Mr. Depp prior to Dr. Kipper's arrival, would that have been reflected in your notes?
Yes.
If Mr. Depp's behavior had been unmanageable prior to Dr. Kipper's arrival, would that have been reflected in your notes?
Yes.
Can we please go to the next entry for August 13th? And Ms. Lloyd, this is also a note that you prepared.
Yes.
Now, I'd like to direct your attention to the portion of the note that starts with 1340. Again, this is military time, is that right?
Correct.
And I think you testified earlier, this is the time that you prepared the note, not the time of the events reflected in the note, is that right?
Yes. Sometimes, I mean, I don't recall specifics, but sometimes they were at times and sometimes they were done later.
So generally speaking, when you prepare these nursing notes, how long after the events reflected in the note was the note actually prepared by you?
It varied.
Okay. Okay, so directing your attention back to the portion that starts with 1340, do you see where it says patient's fiance text to say it wasn't feeling well, MD orders Phenos 64.8 milligrams, Neurontin 600 milligrams stat. Patient and fiance informed that today and tomorrow will be the most difficult days and to keep in close contact with us. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you recall informing Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard that the following days would be the most difficult?
Just what was stated in my notes.
Can we please go to the entry for August 17th, 2014? Do you see that?
I do.
And this is a note you prepared?
Correct.
Do you recall this specific event?
I do not.
Do you have any reason to doubt that what is reflected in your note is accurate?
No.
Okay. So when you wrote RN and MD found patient sitting quietly on his porch, you believe that's an accurate recitation of how you found Mr. Depp on this date?
Correct.
When you wrote that he was calm and stated he was frustrated, you have no reason to doubt the accuracy of that statement?
Correct.
Could we please bring back up Exhibit 23 and specifically go to the August 18th, 2014 entry, which is on Dep 1677. Ms. Lloyd, I'd like to direct your attention to, well, first of all, this is a note that you prepared, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I'd like to direct your attention to the end of the note, which is actually on the second page, or the next page. Do you see at the end here where it says patient was escorted to bed? Do you see that?
Yes.
Would that have been you who escorted Mr. Depp to bed?
I don't recall.
You testified earlier, though, that you did see Mr. Depp in the home that he was staying in on the island, correct?
Correct.
And it says plan is to leave the island tomorrow. See that?
I do.
And directing your attention to the next note, August 19th, do you see that it says next to 2335, arrive back in LA?
Yes.
Okay, so does this accurately reflect that you left the island on August 19th, 2014?
According to these notes, yes.
Okay. I'd like to direct your attention to the August 20th, 2014 entry, which starts on the next page. And then if you go to the next page as well, you can see that there's another entry for August 20th, 2014. Do you see that?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay. On this page here, I'd like to direct your attention to the portion that starts with 1230. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now it says here RN and MD spent time talking with patients. Do you see that?
I do.
This would have been you and Dr. Kipper, correct?
Correct.
And does this reflect that you spoke with Mr. Depp in person?
I don't recall. I would, yes.
Okay. And the note goes on to say, patient expressed frustration with the detox process and with not liking how the phenobarb was making him feel. Initially, he stated he was done with the process and no longer wanted MD and RN services. After processing his feelings and realizing how far he had come, and that part of his wanting to give up was due to tensions between him and his fiance. Patient, fiance, RN, and MD came up with a plan for fiance to take a few days for herself, and patient was willing to continue treatment, but was going to refuse phenobarbital from this point forward. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay, did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Do you recall tensions between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard at this stage in his detox process?
Yes.
And what do you recall about that?
I recall Johnny feeling that she was trying to interfere.
In what way did he feel she was trying to interfere?
By reporting to us things that he didn't feel were true.
Can you think of a specific instance where Ms. Heard reported something to you that you found out later was not true?
I cannot remember specifics.
Do you recall the plan for Ms. Heard to take a few days for herself?
I don't recall specifics.
But you do recall there being tension between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard around this time?
Yes.
And do you recall that having an impact on Mr. Depp's treatment?
I don't recall specifics.
Let's go on to the entry for August 25th, please. First of all, is this a note that you've prepared?
It is.
Directing your attention to the portion that starts with 1900. First line says meeting at MD's house was quite stressful for patient. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you recall attending a meeting with Mr. Depp at Dr. Kipper's house?
I don't recall.
The next line says, him and his fiance are having a hard time communicating and understanding each other's point of view and feelings. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you recall any specifics about this situation?
I do not.
A couple sentences down, it says, plan is for fiance to start therapy tomorrow. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you recall that Ms. Hurd started therapy shortly after Mr. Depp's detox process?
I don't recall.
Do you have any understanding as to why Ms. Hurd was starting therapy?
I do not.
Directing your attention to the entry for August 27th, 2014, which starts on Dep 1687, or 86, excuse me. 1686, yep. Again, this is an entry you prepared.
It is.
Okay. Do you see where it says, received text from patient's sister that patient had been recording music with his friend until 5 and did not go to sleep until 7 and is currently sleeping?
Yes.
And who is Mr. Depp's sister that's referred to here?
Christy.
And at this time, had you met Christy before?
I don't recall.
Have you met Christy before?
Yes.
How many times?
I don't know.
More than once?
More than once, yes.
At this time, had you communicated with Christy about Mr. Depp's treatment before?
I don't recall.
Okay, the entry goes on to say, sister stated that patient and his fiance had had a disagreement last night and that patient was able to remain calm and handle the situation appropriately. Do you see that?
You?
Do you recall Christy telling you that?
I do not.
See the portion of the note that starts with 1330.
I do.
The second line reads, patient expressing feeling about argument with fiance and feels relationship is putting unwanted stress on him right now. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you recall this exchange with Mr. Depp? Sorry, I didn't catch that. Like,
I'm sorry, I do not.
okay. Based on this note, can you tell whether this was a conversation you had in person with Mr. Depp?
Based on this note, yes.
Do you recall on other occasions Mr. Depp expressing to you that his relationship was putting unwanted stress on him?
I'd have to review my notes.
Okay, directing your attention down to the portion of the note that starts with 2130. It says, patient back home. For patient, he had a long conversation with fiance, and they both understand that right now is a time to work on themselves as individuals. Patient's fiance now has an RN to help her anxiety and to monitor her while she is starting a new mood stabilizer medication. Do you see that?
I do.
Who was, I believe you testified to this earlier, Ms. Hurd's nurse was Erin Borum, is that right? And Ms. Borum was an employee of yours, is that correct?
She was an independent contractor.
Okay. But you placed her, Dr. Kipper, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Do you recall when Ms. Borum was assigned Ms. Hurd?
I do not recall.
Do you have any understanding as to why Ms. Hurd needed a nurse?
Other than what my notes state, I do not.
Do you recall witnessing Ms. Hurd being anxious or having anxiety?
I do not recall.
Now, the last line here says, patient feels this will take some of the stress off their relationship, and in return, if we could go to the next page, take some stress off of him. Did I read that correctly?
I do.
Do you recall why Mr. Depp felt that Ms. Hurd having a nurse would reduce the stress on their relationship?
I do not recall.
From your perspective, was it important to Mr. Depp's treatment that his stress be reduced?
Yes.
And why is that?
Any patient going through detox or changes, it's always important to relieve as much stress as you can from them.
Let's go to the entry for September 10th, please, which is on Dep 1694 and continues on to 1695. September 10th, 2014 entry. This is your entry, correct? You prepared this?
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry. And if I could direct your attention to the portion that starts with 2330, which is actually on the next page. The first line says, met with patient, he complained of body aches and nausea. Do you see that?
I do.
And does this reflect that you were physically with Mr. Depp at this time?
It would, yes.
Okay. A couple sentences down, it says, and this portion is highlighted here, while RN was visiting patient, fiance came in and tried to start argument with him. Patient was able to stay calm and talk his fiance down. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you recall the incident reflected in this note?
I do not.
Do you recall any instances where you witnessed Ms. Hurd try to start a fight with Mr. Depp?
Objection.
How many instances do you remember?
I don't recall specific numbers.
Do you remember at least one?
Yes.
Do you remember more than one?
Yes.
More than two?
I don't recall specific numbers.
What do you remember about that first instance that you can remember?
I remember one night trying to leave the penthouse and Amber standing in the elevator and not letting us leave.
Why wasn't she letting you leave?
She didn't want him to leave.
Had they been fighting previous to that point?
I wasn't there previously.
And what's the other instance you remember?
I can't remember specifics.
Do you have any reason to doubt the accuracy of what's reflected in your note here?
No.
Do you have any understanding as to what you meant when you said patient was able to remain calm, was able to stay calm, excuse me, and talk his fiance down?
I don't recall the events of that note.
Have you seen Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard get in a fight before this date?
I don't recall.
Let's go to the entry for September 12th, please. I believe on the next page, yep. And this is a note that you prepared as well, Ms. Lloyd?
Is correct.
Okay. The first line here says RN and MD visited patient at work. Do you see that?
I do.
And so this reflects that both you and Dr. Kipper went and saw Mr. Depp. Is that right?
Correct.
And the entry states here, patient expressed some concerns with fiance's behavior and how it is adding stress to his life. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you recall this, Mr. Depp saying this to you in this instance?
I do not.
Do you have any reason to doubt the accuracy of what's reflected in your note?
I do not.
Could we please go to the entry for October 22nd, 2014, which starts on 1717 and continues on to Deb 1718.
My notes are different. What's the top of the, I see the top of that, just so I know what I'm looking. 10. Okay.
Oh. First of all, this is also a note that you prepared, correct?
Correct.
And if you want to take a minute and read through the note, I know it goes on for 2 pages.
Okay. Oh.
Just let me know when you've read through it.
Okay.
Fair to say that this note reflects that you and Mr. were in Georgia at this when the events in this note occurred?
I think we were, at the end, it says now in Georgia. I don't recall, but a travel day.
Well, you see above that where it says 10/22, and then below it, it says now in Georgia?
Yeah.
Okay. So based on your notes, you were in Georgia on October 22nd, 2015? Okay. Do you recall being in Georgia with Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Do you recall who else was with you in Georgia?
I don't recall who was with us, but the purpose of the trip was to visit Amber on location.
Okay, so Amber was in Georgia as well.
Yes.
Okay. Now, directing your attention to the portion of the entry which is on the next page and begins with 1530. It states here, he requested an emergency session with the psychiatrist to discuss feeling about arguments with fiance and would like some tools to help him feel with his emotions. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you recall Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard having a fight on this trip in Georgia?
I do not.
Do you recall who Mr. Depp's psychiatrist was at this time?
I do not.
Do you recall why Mr. Depp started seeing a psychiatrist?
I do not.
Directing your attention down to the portion of the note that starts with 2010, it says here, patient spoke to a psychiatrist for 50 minutes and was open and honest with his feelings. He feels better after conversation, but also feels he is in a no-win situation with fiance. Do you see that?
I'm kind of lost where we're at right now.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, 1530. Okay, yes, yeah, I see it. Sorry.
Okay. Does this reflect that you were present with Mr. Depp when he spoke to his psychiatrist?
I don't remember. It was based on him telling me or if I was present.
Do you recall Mr. Depp ever expressing to you that he felt he was in a no-win situation with Ms. Heard?
I don't recall those specific words.
But you wrote them in your nursing notes, correct? Do you see at the bottom, still in this portion that starts with 2010, do you see where it says, plan is for patient and fiance to go to dinner this evening. Patient is feeling exhausted and wants to stay home, but does not want to upset fiance. Do you see that?
We're on the same page.
Yes, we're still in the portion of the note that starts with 2010.
2010. Okay. Yes. Yep.
Do you recall this specific incident?
I do not.
Do you have any understanding as to why Mr. Depp would be concerned about upsetting his fiance?
I do not.
If we could go on to the next entry, which is on the same page, 1023. And this is also a note you prepared, Ms. Lloyd?
It is.
Okay. It says here you text patient to see if RN could come by and check in. Do you see that?
I did. I do.
Why did you want to check in on Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
Were you ever concerned about Mr. Depp when he and Ms. Heard were in arguments?
Yes.
Why were you concerned?
Their arguments were a trigger for him emotionally.
Any other reasons?
No.
What do you mean by a trigger for him emotionally?
It would cause him to be upset, add stress.
The next portion of this note says, when RN arrived in the room, patient was agitated and felt fiance was using the term mania to explain his behavior and excuse herself from any fault during arguments. Do you see that?
You?
Do you have any, did you ever hear Ms. Heard use the term mania to describe Mr. Depp?
I don't recall if that was, I heard it from her or heard it that she was saying it to others.
But you do have some recollection of hearing that Ms. Heard was using that word, whether it was directly from her or from others.
Yes.
The note goes on to say, patient was upset by this label. RN processed his feelings with patient, and he was able to see fiance's negative behaviors. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Do you have any recollection of what you meant when you wrote that?
I do not.
You don't have any understanding of what fiance's negative behaviors refers to?
I don't recall specifics.
Do you recall generally?
Yes.
And what do you recall?
At times, what's the word? She would almost try to instigate him.
And when you say she, you're referring to Ms. Heard?
Yes.
Did you ever witness that personally?
Yes.
On more than one occasion?
Yes.
Ballpark, how many times did you witness that during the time you cared for Mr. Depp?
I don't recall a number.
More than 5?
I don't recall.
When you say Ms. Heard would try to instigate him, what do you mean?
I remember an argument or being in there when he was going from room to room trying to remove himself from a situation, and she would just follow him from room to room and not give him his space.
And that's one specific instance that you remember?
Yes.
Do you remember seeing that type of behavior on other occasions?
Yes.
Are you aware of any of the fights that we just went through? Are you aware that any of them became physical?
No.
From what you observed, what was the cause of the friction between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard during this time?
I don't know.
Could we please go to the entry for November 3rd, 2014, which is on Dep 172.
172, sorry, Council.
Yes, 1721. Ms. Lloyd, this is also a note you prepared?
Correct.
And it says here, you arrived at Mr. Depp's home and he was, quote, focused on relationship with fiance and is struggling with conflicted emotions. Did I read that right?
Yes.
Based on this note, is that something Mr. Depp would have told you?
Based on this note, it appears so.
Looks like there's another note for November 3rd, below this one. Do you see that? And it continues on to the next page, which is Dep 1722. If we could go there, please.
Very good. Very good. Thank
You sound
And Ms. Lloyd, directing your attention to the portion that starts with 1700. Do you see where it says RN went back to patient's house? He was chatting with a friend and is feeling stressed about his relationship. Do you see that?
I do.
And it goes on to say he feels she is not being truthful with him and he is not sure how to comfort her about this confront her about this when she arrives home. Do you see that?
Yes.
And the she here refers to Ms. Hurd, is that right?
Correct.
Do you remember this exchange with Mr. Depp?
Objection, hearsay.
Do you have any reason to doubt the accuracy of your note?
I do not.
If we could turn to the entry for November 17th, 2014, which begins on Dep 1723, which is the difference. Ms. Lloyd, you see at the very bottom, it says 1117.
Yes.
Okay. And then I think the entry itself is on the next page. Yes. Thank you. This is also a note you prepared.
Correct.
And this says RN and MD went to patient's house to assess him. Do you see that?
I do.
And so again, this reflects that you and Dr. Kipper went to see Mr. Depp.
Correct.
Do you have any recollection of why why Dr. Kipper was visiting with Mr. Depp at this time?
I do not.
The next line says, patient appeared anxious and depressed over relationship issues. Do you see that?
I do.
And then it says, patient continues to be ambivalent about relationship status. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you recall Mr. Depp expressing these sentiments to you?
Objection, hearsay.
I don't recall specific conversations.
But you also have, but this is what you wrote in your notes, correct? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Oh,
Correct. Sorry.
sorry. Do you recall when Mr. Depp and Ms. Hurd got married?
I don't recall the dates.
Okay. But you testified earlier that you did attend the wedding.
Correct.
Were you there to provide nursing services?
I don't really recall if I was a guest or I don't think they made that clear to me.
Did Dr. Kipper attend the wedding?
He did.
And did Aaron Borum attend the wedding?
He did.
Do you recall any discussions of a prenuptial agreement between Mr. Depp and Ms. Hurd before they got married?
Yes.
And what do you recall?
I don't recall specifics.
What do you recall generally?
I only recall what Johnny told me about the conversation,
And what was that?
that she didn't take it well.
Didn't take what well?
The idea
Sorry, I didn't hear the end of that.
the idea of having to sign a prenup.
Did Johnny tell you that he asked Ms. Hurd to sign a prenup?
I don't recall specifics.
But you recall Johnny telling you that Ms. Hurd didn't want to sign a prenup.
Yes.
And when you say didn't take that well, what are you referring to?
From what Johnny said, her reaction was when they spoke about the prenup.
Do you recall that in January of 2015, Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard traveled to Japan together?
I don't recall.
Do you recall traveling to Japan with Mr. Depp?
I recall being in Japan, yes.
Do you remember anything specific about that trip?
I do not.
Do you recall Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard having a fight on a plane?
I recall a fight on a plane, but I don't know the time it was around.
What do you remember about that fight?
It was another instance where he was sitting at a table and not wanting to talk, and she wouldn't leave the table.
What was she doing?
She wouldn't leave the table. And he was saying, please just go away.
And what was she saying?
I don't remember. I don't remember her words.
How was her tone?
I don't recall.
Okay. You spoke with Mr. Nadelhaft about this earlier, but at some point you traveled to Australia with Mr. Depp, right?
Correct.
Can we pull up what has been previously marked as Exhibit 14? I'd like to direct your attention to the March 1st, 2015 email from Dr. Kipper at 2:10 p.m. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you recall Mr. Depp having issues with his sleep when he was in Australia?
Not specifically in Australia.
Do you recall Mr. Depp having issues with his sleep generally?
Yes.
And what issues were those?
A hard time sleeping and staying on a sleep schedule.
Miss Lloyd, when you were in Australia with Mr. Depp, did you see where he was staying?
Yes.
And how many times did you go to that property?
I don't recall specific numbers.
Fair to say you went there multiple times, though?
Yes.
You talked about this with Mr. Nadelhaft earlier. At some point in Australia, you learned that Mr. Depp had injured his finger, correct?
Correct.
And Dr. Kipper was already in Australia at that time?
Correct.
And you testified earlier that you and Dr. Kipper went to see Mr. Depp after he injured his finger, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall anything about what do you recall about Mr. Depp's physical appearance when you first saw him?
Don't recall specifics.
What do you remember about his demeanor, if anything?
I don't remember the events of when I first arrived.
But you did see Mr. Depp at that time, correct?
I can't recall when I initially saw him after the finger event.
And I believe you testified you don't recall whether Miss Heard was at the house when you went to attend to Mr. Depp, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Do you remember seeing Miss Heard in Australia?
Yes.
Did you ever see any injuries on Miss Heard when she was in Australia?
Yes.
What did you see?
A bruise on her arm.
Anything else?
No.
Did she have any injuries to her face that you can recall?
Not that I recall.
Any cuts or abrasions that you can recall?
Not that I recall.
Do you recall Ms. Heard ever seeking medical treatment from you while she was in Australia?
I do not recall her ever seeking a medical treatment from me.
At the time that Mr. Depp injured his finger, Ms. Heard was a patient of Dr. Kipper, correct?
I'm not sure.
Do you recall whether Ms. Borum was already assigned to Ms. Heard?
I don't recall if she was working with her at that time.
Can we turn back to the nursing notes, which is Exhibit 23? And specifically, entry for March 7th, which is on 1732.
Is this March 7th of 2014? Or,
Yes, it says 3/7/15. Do you see that?
oh, so 15. Hold on, no. Oh, I wasn't there on 14. Yes,
You said you saw a bruise on Miss Heard's arm at some point when you were in Australia, correct?
correct.
Do you have any understanding of how she got that bruise?
I do not.
Okay, directing your attention to the entry for March 7th, 2015. You see here it says MD received text message from client that he had been arguing with his wife and that he had cut his finger.
Yes, I see that.
Okay, so this is the date that you went and saw Mr. Depp after his injury, correct?
Correct.
Now, if I could direct your attention down to the portion that starts with 1530.
Okay.
It says MD cleaned and dressed wound to our middle finger. Do you see that?
Thank you.
What does our middle finger reflect?
Right.
And so Mr. Depp had cut his middle right finger, is that correct?
According to this, yes.
Now, if I could direct your attention down to the bottom part of this entry that starts with 1130. Do you see that?
I do.
Now, this starts with patient and staff returned from ER at 2130. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So, is it correct that the 1130 at the beginning of this is referring to 11:30 p.m.?
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah.
So this is the same day that you were notified that Mr. Depp had injured his finger, correct?
According to this, yes.
Okay. And this was also the same day that Mr. Depp was seen in the AER for his finger, correct? Okay. In the middle of the page here, do you see, or in the middle of this entry, do you see where it says, upon arrival back to apartment, patient discussed feelings of anger and sadness about his relationship. Patient was encouraged to stay away from wife as the relationship is toxic. Patient expressed verbal understanding and why they needed to separate. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you have any recollection of this conversation beyond what's reflected in the notes?
I do not.
Do you have any reason to doubt the accuracy of what you documented in your notes?
I do not.
Do you recall advising Mr. Depp to stay away from Miss Heard?
I don't recall anything other than what's stated in my notes.
Do you recall ever having the view that Mr. Depp and Miss Heard's relationship was toxic?
Yes.
And what's the basis for that view?
Conversations that he would share with me.
What did Mr. Depp share with you?
I don't remember specifics, just like things we've reviewed in my notes, that he would be emotional and that the relationship was causing him stress.
After Mr. Depp injured his finger in Australia, do you recall him coming back to LA?
Yeah, I don't recall specifics, but I know we did return to LA at some point.
Was Mr. Depp's hand bandaged at all?
Yes.
And why was that?
Beforehand we kept it bandaged to keep it clean, and then he had surgery and it was bandaged after the surgery.
Do you recall that Mr. Depp had pins in his finger?
Yes.
Do you recall Mr. Depp reporting that his finger was in pain?
Yes.
How would he report his pain to you?
I have to review my notes for specifics.
Well, let's take a look at the entry in your notes for March 23rd, 2015, which is on page, it starts on page 1735 and goes on to 736.
I see it.
Actually, before we turn to that one, do you see in the entry above for 32215? Do you see that entry?
Yep.
Okay, and do you see next to 20, the portion of the entry that starts with 2015, you see in the middle it says currently 5/10?
Yes.
Do you know what that refers to?
It's a pain scale.
Okay. And is that how Mr. Depp would report his pain to you?
According to my notes.
Okay. Okay, so now going to the entry for March 23rd. First of all, do you see the portion of the entry that starts with 120?
Yes.
Is this 120 in the morning, a.m.?
According to this, yes.
Okay. Do you see it says patient states his wife is trying to argue with him?
I see that.
Okay. And again, you have no reason to doubt the accuracy of your note.
Correct.
Okay. Turning to the next page, do you see the portion of the note that starts with 545?
Yes.
And it says call to loft, correct? What does that refer to?
I don't know specifically. Loft is where they were living.
Is that the Eastern Columbia building?
Correct.
And then the next two sections of this note says 8:20 Torrid Val, and then at 14:45 the same thing. Do you see that? What is that referring to?
Incomplete notes, it would have been toward all in volume administered.
And do you have any recollection as to why those medications would have been administered?
They were for his pain.
Okay. And then you see below that it says FU Thursday afternoon and Tuesday afternoon, skin graft bandage off, week from Tuesday, pin off in 2 weeks.
Yes.
What does this reflect?
I don't recall.
Did Mr. Depp have a skin graft on his finger?
He did.
And I think you just testified, he had pins in his fingers as well, right? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Correct.
Okay. So at this time on March 23rd, he had bandages and a skin graft and pins in his finger.
According to this, yes.
And then, do you see in the section that starts with 2000, patient informed wife is coming to talk to him and he became extremely anxious. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you have any recollection of why Mr. Depp was anxious?
I do not.
Do you remember being present for a fight with Mr. Depp, between Mr. Depp and Miss Heard, shortly after Mr. Depp returned from Australia?
I don't remember specifics.
Do you recall a fight when Amber's sister Whitney was present?
I don't recall.
Can we please pull up document H, please?
Exhibit 27.
Now, just for the record, this is a document that has the base number WH106 through 109. And Ms. Lloyd, you're not included on this, but I just want to direct your attention to the first text message here. This is, I can represent to you, these are text messages between Erin Borum and Whitney Heard.
Okay.
And before I proceed, do you know who Whitney Heard is?
Yes.
Have you met her before? On how many occasions have you met Whitney?
I don't recall.
And what is Whitney's relation to Miss Heard?
Sister.
So this first text message appears to be from Erin Borum, and it says, Debbie just, and it's on it's at 14:32 in military time on the date March 23rd, 2015. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and it says, Debbie just told me what is going on and to check with you. Is Amber awake or fall asleep? Do you see that?
Yeah.
Do you recall reaching out to Erin Borum on this date?
I do not.
Directing your attention down to Whitney's, to 3 messages down from Whitney. Or excuse me, let's go up. Do you see that Whitney responds to Erin, she finally fell asleep. And then Erin says, thank goodness, she must be exhausted. Do you want me to come to the loft, or is she safe and sound asleep? Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, and then Whitney responds, safe? No, she's not. She keeps saying she wants to kill herself. Do you see that?
I do.
Did you ever hear Miss Heard say that she wanted to kill herself?
No.
Do these text messages combined with your notes refresh your recollection about an incident that occurred on March 23rd, 2015?
I remember an incident, but I don't remember the dates of it.
What incident are you remembering?
There was an incident where Johnny and Amber got into a fight at the lofts.
And what do you remember about that?
I was staying next door at a hotel, and security had come to get me, saying that they had had an argument and Johnny wanted to go back to 86. So
Is that, is 86 the Sweetser property?
yes.
Okay, sorry, continue.
And so I went to the lofts, and I remember that night Amber was already leaving. She was in the lobby when we walked through, and when she saw that I was coming, she came back up to the apartment.
And what happened when Miss Heard came back up to their apartment?
I don't remember specifically what happened. I remember Johnny was sitting outside and we went to leave, and somehow we didn't end up leaving.
And why didn't you end up leaving?
I don't remember.
Do you remember who else was in the apartment?
I remember Travis, one of the security guards, was there.
Anyone else that you can remember?
I don't remember exactly who else was there.
Is Travis McGivern?
Correct.
Do you recall seeing Ms. Heard throw anything at Mr. Depp?
I do not.
Do you remember Mr. Depp throwing anything at Ms. Heard?
I don't recall.
Do you remember witnessing any physical violence on that occasion?
I saw Johnny push over one of Amber's clothing racks.
Okay. No physical violence directed at
No
a
physical
human, correct? Okay. Okay. And then you said you didn't end up leaving the apartment after that, correct?
At some point that night we left.
And when you say we, who does that include?
Myself, Johnny, and Travis.
And where did you go?
I don't remember.
Okay. Do you know where Amber went that night?
I don't know.
Okay. But she didn't come with you?
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and take our afternoon recess for 15 minutes, okay? Again, don't talk to anybody and don't do any outside research, okay? All right, we'll see you in 15 minutes. All right, if you want to continue with the testimony, thank you.
Can we please go back to the nursing notes, which are exhibit 23? And specifically, could we go to the entry for March 25th that starts on Dep 1736 and goes on to 1737? Ms. Lloyd, do you see at the bottom here where it says 325?
Yes.
Okay, and if we could just go to the next page, you'd agree that this is a continuation of that note, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you see under 1330, it says patient states pain is 4 out of 10. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay, and what does that reflect?
Pain was being rated at a 4 out of 10 out of 10 out of 10.
And then directing your attention down to the entry from March 26th. This is a note that you prepared, yes?
Yes.
Okay. And just to make sure, I'm not sure I asked, but the prior 2 notes we looked at, those are also notes you prepared, right?
Correct.
Now, if you could, why don't you take a moment and read through this note and just let me know when you're done.
Okay.
Now, the beginning of the note starts at 1:45. Do you see that?
I do.
And so again, is that 1:45 in the morning?
Correct.
And it says here, RN called the patient's home. Upon arrival, patient and wife were fighting in the garage. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you remember this incident?
I do not.
It says, when argument became heated, patient removed himself from situation and had security drive him to another home. Do you see that?
I do.
I think you just testified you don't remember witnessing this, correct?
I do not.
But you don't have any reason to doubt the accuracy of what you wrote down in your note, correct?
I do not.
Had you seen Mr. Depp remove himself from fights before in this manner?
Yes.
Could we please turn to the entry for March 31st, which is on page Dep 1740. Okay. Ms. Lloyd, this is also a note you prepared?
It is.
Do you see the portion that starts 1:30? Patient continues to CO pain 10/10, which is causing anxiety and insomnia. Do you see that? And
yes.
What does this mean? Plaintiff continues to CO pain 10/10.
Complain of.
Okay. And the 10 out of 10 is the pain on the scale that you referenced previously, correct?
Correct.
Directing your attention down to the portion that starts with 1615. It says, at follow-up with surgeon, bandage was removed from skin graft. Graft took 100%, but there was an infection under bolster. Finger was drained, pin was removed, and Rosafin 1G was administered during appointment. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Even if my pronunciation is incorrect. What does this reflect that Mr. Depp had the bandage from his skin graft on his right middle finger removed on this date?
Meaning removed at that time or removed for good?
Removed at that time.
Yeah, at that time, that's what that would mean,
And the pin from his finger was also removed?
according to this.
Okay. And when you say the bandage was removed at that time, are you clarifying that because another bandage was put on?
I don't remember. That's why I was clarifying.
Okay. Do you remember what type of bandages Mr. Depp had on his hand at this time?
I didn't hear you. What type of bandage?
Yes.
I don't remember specifics.
Was it a hard cast or a soft cast?
Soft.
Okay. Was Mr. Depp's hand I'm sorry.
I don't recall if it was a cast, but I know the bandage was soft.
Okay. Do you recall whether Mr. Depp could move the hand that was bandaged?
Hand, yes, for a while. His finger was like splinted.
Okay. Did he grab anything with that hand?
I remember him pretending he had a claw. He could do this.
Were certain fingers bound together in the cast?
I don't remember specifics.
Mr. Depp eventually returned to Australia after the time period we were just discussing, correct?
Correct.
And you returned with him?
Correct.
And how long did you stay in Australia on that trip?
I don't recall.
I'd like to direct your attention to the last page of this document, which has entry for July 1st. Do you see that?
Yes.
Please take a moment and read through this and just let me know when you're done.
I'm done.
Okay, great. This is a note you prepared, yes?
Correct.
And do you remember the events reflected in this note?
I do not.
Directing your attention to the portion that starts with 1235. Do you see where it says, RN received text from patient's assistants that the arguments between patient and wife are continuing and RN should come to the set to see patient? Did I read that correctly? Sorry, I didn't hear your response.
Yes.
Okay. Who is the assistant referred to here, if you can recall?
I don't recall. He had two main assistants,
And who were they?
Stephen and Nathan.
Do you recall both of them being in Australia?
I don't recall if they were both there.
Why did you understand, strike that. Why did you understand that you were being called to set?
Objection of hearsay.
I don't recall at the time.
All right, now directing your attention to the last part of this note that says 2100. Says here, between shooting, patient was able to express his feeling to RN. He explained that his wife makes him feel that he can never do anything right and that they cannot have a conversation without her blowing up. Do you see that? And I think you testified you don't recall having this exchange with Mr. Depp.
Correct.
It goes on to say, patient was given positive reinforcement for expressing his feelings. Patient verbalized he knows it's best for them to take a break from each other when the fights start to escalate, but how she will follow him from room to room when he tries to get away. Do you see that?
I do.
Have you ever personally observed Mr. Depp try to get away from Miss Heard and her then following him?
Yes.
But you don't recall him telling you in this specific instance?
I do not.
And again, you don't have any reason to doubt the accuracy of this note?
I do not.
This appears to be the last note reflected in this document. Do you see that? And I think you said you don't recall specifically when you stopped caring for Mr. Depp, correct?
I'm sorry, what was the answer? Sorry.
Correct.
Sorry, thank you.
Do you recall why you stopped providing nursing services to Mr. Depp?
I do not.
Did you continue to work for Dr. Kipper after you stopped providing nursing services to Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Now, I think you testified earlier, you don't recall the last time you saw Mr. Depp?
Not for sure, no.
What's the last time that you remember seeing him?
I went to his, one of his Hollywood vampire show out here in the desert.
Was Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard still in a relationship when you saw Mr. Depp the last time?
No. Not that I was aware of.
When was the last time you saw Ms. Heard?
I have no idea.
What's the last time you remember seeing her?
I honestly don't know.
During the time you were Mr. Depp's nurse, did you ever see Mr. Depp physically abuse Ms. Heard?
No.
If you had witnessed this, would you have documented it in your nursing notes?
Yes.
Did you ever see Mr. Depp throw anything at Ms. Heard?
I do not recall ever seeing him throw anything.
During the time you cared for Mr. Depp, did you ever see Ms. Heard physically abuse Mr. Depp?
No.
Did you ever see Ms. Heard throw anything at Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
In the time that you cared for Mr. Depp, did he ever tell you that Ms. Heard was physically abusive towards him?
I don't recall any conversations like that.
Were you ever concerned for Mr. Depp's safety around Ms. Heard?
No,
Were you ever called over by Mr. Depp when he was in a fight with Ms. Heard?
I can't remember if it was when a fight. I remember being called over after fights.
And why, to the extent you know, why were you being called over?
My role with Johnny was medication or emotional support.
How many times did you travel with Mr. Depp while he was under your care?
Multiple, but I don't know a specific number.
Did you ever witness Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard get in arguments while you were traveling?
Yes.
And what would Mr. Depp do in those circumstances?
I don't remember specifics other than the one time I mentioned on the airplane.
Did Mr. Depp ever book a separate room to separate himself from Ms. Heard?
I don't recall.
Have you ever witnessed Ms. Heard lose her temper?
I don't recall specifics.
What do you recall generally?
I can't recall.
In the time you treated Mr. Depp, did you ever suspect he was under the influence of alcohol?
I don't recall specific times being of concern.
Do you recall any specific instances when you were concerned he was under the influence of drugs that had not been prescribed by one of his physicians?
I don't recall.
Did Mr. Depp ever tell you that someone had taken his prescription drugs?
I don't recall a conversation.
Could we pull up Exhibit I, please?
Please stand by.
And just for the record, this is a document bearing the base numbers Depp 7804 through 7848.
728.
Ms. Lloyd, these are, I'll represent that these are text messages between you and Mr. Depp. I think you've seen some portions of this document when you were answering Mr. Nadelhaft's questions. But I'd like to just direct your attention specifically to messages between you and Mr. Depp on May 27th, 2015, which appears on page 7841 and goes through to 7843.
Sorry, counsel, was there an instruction?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Can you please go to the page 7841? And we're going to be scrolling through the pages after that. I think it's up maybe 2 pages. Yeah. Great. See the text message that starts in row 320.
Yes.
Okay, So I would like you to please read through the text messages in row 320 through 337, which are from May 27th, 2015. And before you begin, I just want to confirm this number under participants next to your name. That's your phone number.
Oh yeah, above. I was looking below. I was like, no, but above, yes.
Okay. Okay, so if you could read through the text messages reflected in rows 320 through 337, and then just let me know when you're done.
Okay, I'm done through 322. Okay, I'm done through 330.
Are you done through 337?
Oh yeah, I was on 330.
All right. Do you recall this exchange with Mr. Depp?
I do not.
Do you have an understanding of what you and Mr. Depp are discussing?
I mean, just from what the text messages says, I can see what he was saying.
And what was Mr. Depp saying?
That his as needed medications were missing.
Anything else about how they came to be missing?
I already don't remember what the above text stated.
Okay, let's go to the text that's in row 33, please. Oh, 333, please. And it says here, saw them, she wiped me out of everything. Need Adderall in the PRNs. I don't like to be out of stuff on the just in case kind of deal. I can't believe she's got the balls to flat out steal my meds for her fucking debaucheries. Hard game. After all, she is the sister. Ex me. Did I read that right?
Objection here.
Do you have any understanding as to what Mr. Depp is referring to there?
I do not.
Do you know who he's referring to when he says she is the sister?
I do not.
Sure. How did Miss Heard treat you when you first started caring for Mr. Depp?
She was accepting.
Did that ever change in the time you treated Mr. Depp?
I felt it did.
You felt that at some time Miss Heard's demeanor towards you changed, correct?
Yes.
Okay. When do you recall her demeanor changing?
I don't recall specifically.
How did her treatment of you change?
It wasn't so much her treatment of me hearing that she didn't want me around from other members.
Who did you hear that from?
I don't recall specific. It was from other staff, people that we worked with.
Did you understand, do you have any understanding as to why she didn't want you around?
I do not.
Was Ms. Heard unfriendly towards you?
No.
Did Ms. Heard ever get angry at you in your presence?
Not that I recall.
So just to be clear, you're understanding that Ms. Heard's feelings towards you changed is based off of what you heard from other people, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And your understanding was that, as you said, she didn't want you around, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Depp was your patient, correct?
Correct.
And Amber Heard was not your patient. Is that right?
Correct.
You had testified before, I believe, that you said one of your roles for Mr. Depp was providing him emotional support. Did I recall that correctly?
Correct.
That you didn't have that role for Amber Heard, correct?
Correct.
One of the exhibits I saw, it was exhibit, I believe, Lloyd 22. There was a reference to polysubstance abuse. What is that?
Polysubstance abuse is used to determine the use of different drugs and or alcohol.
So it's abusing more than one drug or alcohol, is that right?
That's what the term means, yes.
Okay. Could we go to Lloyd 23? So Ms. Lloyd would be the March 7th, 2015 entries.
March. Okay.
And you see the entry for 1300?
Yes.
You wrote, patient was having a hard time leaving the house, so security suggested the MD and RN go to house to see patient. Upon arrival to house, patient was sitting in car ready to leave. MD assessed patient's finger and will spend more time with patient at the location he's being moved to. You wrote that?
I did.
And that was based, and you wrote that based off of information you were provided?
I don't recall what that first sentence is regarding.
All right, you don't have any reason to question the accuracy of the statement?
I do not.
Okay. And then at 11:30, the bottom entry, you had testified a bit to that. After the highlighted portion, it says MD offered patient Valium 10 milligrams IM to help with his anxiety and anger, but patient refused. You wrote that?
I did.
Okay. And you have no reason to question the accuracy of that?
I do not.
Okay. Was Mr. Depp expressing any, you recall Mr. Depp expressing any anger?
Only what I see I referred to earlier in that note, the portion that was highlighted.
Okay. Then the highlighting goes going into the next page. Patient was talking about wanting to drink alcohol but did not obtain any. You wrote that?
I did.
And that was based off of what you saw with Mr. Depp?
According to this, yes.
Okay. And there's no reason to question the accuracy of that note?
Correct.
Okay. And then 3/8/15, 145, you write, patient has been on phone with his security guard that is staying with his wife at their rented house. Patient is discussing wanting to go home to LA tomorrow and rehashing night. Patient's personal security guard came to stay with patient. RN will be next door and instructed security to call during the night if needed. You wrote that?
Correct.
Do you know what you meant by patient is discussing wanting to go home to LA tomorrow and rehashing night?
I do not recall what that's referring to.
I believe you testified way in the beginning that you go to Dr. Kipper as a patient. Is that right?
Correct.
Not going into details, but how long have you been his patient?
Since before I went to nursing, early 2000s.
Okay. And do you consider Dr. Kipper to be a friend?
Yes.
When you were with Mr. Depp in Australia, was he drinking at that time?
I don't recall him drinking.
Do you recall that he was specifically abstaining from drinking during that time?
I don't recall.
Did you ever see Ms. Heard drink in front of Mr. Depp while he was abstaining from alcohol?
Yes.
Did you ever, did he ever ask her not to do that, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
All right.